Welcome to Learning to Earning to Justice, Youth-Led Pathways for Gender Equality at CSW70. A webinar co-hosted by Generation Unlimited and UN Women and brought to you by Youth Foresight, a global knowledge facility jointly managed by the ILO's Global Initiative on Decent Jobs for Youth and UNICEF Generation Unlimited. Before we move into today's conversation, allow me to take a brief moment to remind us why this space and this moment matters. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Your presence here is not incidental. It reflects a shared commitment to advancing the rights of young women, especially through learning to earning, and to shaping a world where every young woman and every girl has access to opportunities, to justice, and to the power to make informed, autonomous decisions about her own life. At its core, this conversation is about dignity, it's about choice, it's about whether systems are designed to enable young women to not merely survive, but to lead and to thrive and to define their own futures. We must ask ourselves some very important questions. What does justice truly mean if a young woman cannot access education? What does opportunity look like if learning does not translate into earning? And what does empowerment amount to if economic participation does not come with a voice, safety, and ability to be free from violence and discrimination? In the run-up of the CSW70, today's event brings together young people, youth-led women-led organizations, UN partners, civil society actors, and allies who believe that education, skills development, employment, and entrepreneurship are not just economic pathways, but foundational pillars of justice and gender equality. This is a space to reflect critically and collectively. How do we move from intention to impact? How do we ensure that learning to earning pathways dismantle rather than reproduce inequality? And how do we center the lived experiences of adolescent girls and young women as we shape policies meant to serve them? We hope this conversation is not only informative but transformative, that challenges assumptions, deepens understanding, and strengthens our collective resolve to build. Building on the inspiration and discussion from this event, we look forward to continuing this conversation with you through the Youth Foresight Community Forum discussion. Importantly, contributions from the Community Forum will feed into the CSW70 Youth and Adolescent Recommendation process led by the UN Women. You will hear more about how you can join the forum through the course of this event, so please stay tuned. So with that, I'm pleased to open today's discussion, inviting our first speaker to set the broader context for what learning to earning pathways are central to gender equality and justice. My pleasure to introduce Ms. Alice Sheffield, Deputy Director, UN System Coordination Division and Head of Global Office in Nairobi at UN Women. Alice started the current role in October 2025, and prior to this, she was in New York as Deputy Director for the UN System Coordination Division, leading the division efforts on the coordination mandate and UN system work. She also served as UN Resident Coordinator in Honduras and Costa Rica, and established and managed the UN Women Office in Malawi and Pakistan as Resident Representative. Alice, over to you and welcome.
Thank you very much. Warm greetings to everyone. Good morning, good evening, good night, good evening, and good everything. In these times, with all that is happening, and I will come back to that, we do need to be together and to wish ourselves to be in good health and good spirits, because it's tough times ahead for sure when we talk about gender equality. But it's lovely to see all of you, and welcome to this webinar in the name of all the participants. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this webinar in preparation of a very, very important meeting of the Commission on the Status of Women, the 70th, imagine 70 years of a Commission on the Status of Women that is going to take place in New York in March. It is very clear, and this is why we are here, that you as young people not only are requesting, but you want to be not only participating, but shaping driving, calling for, and pushing for really the global agenda of gender equality and access to justice. And we hear you loud and clear, and thank you for being here to share that voice with us and to share all your ideas and your passion and your commitment around this very, very important issue. Now, today is the step one. There will be two steps. This one is an online event with global youth adolescents in preparation of the global youth and adolescent recommendations for CSW70. It is time that also your voice is elevated in terms of recommendations that can be shared and really shape the agenda of the member states in the Commission of the Status of Women. And the step two will be then a community forum discussion that follow, working on your inputs to feed into the final set of a youth-driven recommendation for the CSW70. And these, as I said at the beginning, are unprecedented times. The attack to gender equality, the attack to human rights, the attack to diversity, the attack to our will and our call and our right to look to ensure that everyone is included in development and humanitarian response is a reality that we are facing every day. Now, you as coming from organization, youth-led networks know it better than me, how this is impacting, this situation is impacting and affecting your work, but this is the moment for us to be together. This is the moment for us to join our forces and to make sure that your voice, as the voice of the young people, of the youth, adolescents, girls, boys, women and men, all of you in all the diversity, also are really brought at this table and can really shape this global agenda. We know time cannot wait. And we know that 2 out of 3 young people not in education, not in employment, not in training are young women. We know that gender equality and gender inequality is at the heart of many of these issues. And we also very well know, and I see many colleagues here from the rest of the UN system, from other international organizations and others, none of us can address this alone. This is why the strategic partnerships, as also the Agenda 2030 and the SDG 17 reminds us, strategic partnerships are critical. And you can help us drive part of that partnership to ensure that we also bring on the table young people, adults, and elderly people. So this is an opportunity and you in this space you will hear about good practices, about example of where adolescent girls and young women have tools, networks, and opportunities, and how when those are present, how the girls, adolescents, and young women are thriving. And you know it better than me. So we want to hear your contribution, for you to share also the good practices and the great work that you've done, because often we forget about the great work that we're doing on the ground. That I can see there are colleagues from Nigeria, from Zimbabwe, from Mali. So it's fantastic, really. This is part of a process with a virtual, will feed also in the virtual youth forum, the in-person youth forum before the CSW, and then the formal CSW in New York between the 9th and the 20th. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your voice, and never give up. Never give up in claiming your rights. Never give up also in making the point in every opportunity you have. Good luck, and looking forward to working together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alice, for grounding us in both urgency and opportunity. So we will now turn to the overview presentation of the Global Youth and Adolescent Recommendations to CSW70, which are the heart of today's engagement. I'm pleased to welcome 2 speakers, Rita Muyambu, Program Specialist and Coordinator for Youth Engagement at UN Women. In her role, Rita is establishing and strengthening partnerships with youth CSOs and activists to deliver on the outcomes of UN Women's Strategic Plan and the Generation Equality Beijing Platform for Action and Our Common Agenda. Aishka Najib, Youth-Led for Feminist Action for Climate Justice with UN Women and the Generation Equality Forum, who has been directly engaged in the CSW recommendation process. Aishka is a climate and gender justice advocate and has co-founded Fridays for Future, MAPA, acronym for Most Affected People and Areas. She has been a visible youth voice in the International Climate Forum and has been serving in multiple leadership roles, including as a youth-led for Feminist Action for Climate Justice and Generation Equality Forum with UN Women, as well as UNICEF Youth Advocates to the UAE. Rita and Aishka, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for the introduction and the warm welcome. Thank you once again, Alice, as well, for highlighting the importance of advancing gender equality through learning to earning pathways, noting that progress in this area is essential to realizing global commitments, especially the Beijing Platform for Action, and in particular, the action agenda that we're championing, including the SDGs. Now, yes, I would like to bring into perspective why we are doing this. Over the years, we have been trying to ensure that youth voice or young people and adolescent voices is heard within the intergovernmental process of the Commission on the Status of Women. It has been a long ride, and I am really glad to say Aishka has been one of those young people, one of those young feminists, one of those young leaders who has pushed the engagement of young people within this space. We started off with only engaging with about 500 young people. It moved to about 1,000, it then moved to about 8,000, it moved to 12,000, and then it moves to 16,000. And I will let Aishka speak a little bit more around the process itself and the importance of you engaging in that space before we go into the next segment. So over to you, Aishka.
So much, Rita. I'm just going to take a quick moment to share my screen as well because I have a presentation. Just a second. All right, I believe you can see my screen now. It really is an honor to come here and share about the incredible work that not just me, but my fellow young feminists that I've been working together with have been doing over the course of the last couple of years, especially for the Commission on the Status of Women, because we know that as young people, we're experts, and our expertise is also shaped by our lived realities on the ground. And it is very important that the decision is informed by these expertise and ensuring that we're not just beneficiaries to whatever decisions are made in global platforms, but rather are agents of change and leaders in bringing our own voices and priorities to the table. So this year, CSW70 has a specific priority theme focus on access to justice, which has been a critical area of consideration for youth and adolescents. With that, I would like to share with you some of the process that we've been working with. As Rita mentioned, in the early years, we were, still working out and testing and trialing how we consult young people and how we work with young people. We started with about 500, and I'm so glad to say that we had breaking records this year. We were able to consult 23,000 youth and adolescents from 75 plus countries across different regions covering Asia, North America, South America, Europe, and the Oceania region as well as African countries. And one clear message has come out from all of these consultations. It's that access to justice is a key concern for young people around the world. And for them, access to justice is not a question of service, just providing legal aid, but it was more of a question of power, who has access to the power, redistribution of those power and resources, and an accountability framework that clearly distincts the rights holders and the duty bearers and what their responsibilities are. In the consultation process, we have had both virtual and in-person consultations, which allowed us to reach young people who also didn't have access to connectivity, and the in-person consultations were also done in multiple languages. We got over 2,000 written recommendations from these young people that were in different languages and then were translated and later compiled to form the Youth and Adolescents recommendations. So it really is the ambitious document that we hope that the CSW agreed conclusions can catch up to, actually. Let me quickly walk you through some of the key messages that came in around the priority theme on access to justice. Initially, one of the key areas to kind of root us in the context is to reframe the idea of access to justice. Because access to justice doesn't mean just courts or legal services alone. We know that justice is shaped by power, resources, and also our civic rights and democratic practices. And it was also understanding that access to justice need a transformative approach that tackles systemic causes that is inflicting or producing injustice and blocking access to justice. And the systemic causes are gender inequality, racism, casteism, etc., and other forms of violence that is being perpetuated on young women and girls and youth in all their diversity. So youth demands that justice that delivers on their rights and lived realities. And they're very clear that justice is not just a service, but it is a structural and political instrument. Some of the key topics that came across was also survivor-centered justice and bodily autonomy. We know that we are in the era of pushback. We are seeing anti-rights movements rising, and young people are clear. This is not the time to double down. This is not the time to back up on regression. This is the time to protect language on sexual and reproductive health rights, bodily autonomy, and other core justice issues. We're also seeing multiple discriminatory laws coming into practice, especially laws that goes against women human rights defenders, girl and youth advocates and activists, and environmental and land defenders, including indigenous women and girls. There's a clear call out to analyze these discriminatory laws and ensure that they are held in standard to international human rights. Of course, also key concerns on criminalization of harmful practices such as early forced and childhood marriage, female genital mutilation, and GBV, gender-based violence. We're also seeing that we don't just need responsive services, but we need services that address reparation, sustainability, and long-term support to the victims and survivors of different and intersecting forms of discrimination and violence. We also need an accountability mechanism that holds the duty bearers to account, whether that is governments, UN bodies, or even private corporations that are also involved in the influence of many of the loss and regressions that we're seeing around the world. And last but not the least is resources, because we know that money is power. We know that resource is power. And we are making a great progress if we're putting resources into the right places, and if we're putting the resources into youth and young women and girl leaders, because they are also carrying a lot of the change on the ground. And then one of the other areas that I also quickly wanted to cover before I wrap up now is that we are living in the era of some triple planetary crisis. We know that climate injustice is also a justice failure. We cannot have access to justice under the collapsing planetary situations we are in. We also know that this is the era of technology. And as much as good that comes from technology, we've also witnessed that technology can facilitate gender-based violence and harms. And therefore, blinding accountability for tech companies, binding accountability for tech companies is key. We also need to see end to internet shutdowns and digital blackouts and other technological violences that is practiced upon civil society. And last but not the least, justice cannot exist under militarization and war economies. We're also seeing rising conflicts, and it is very important for international forums such as CSW to also confront the arms trade and conflict profiteering, because this access to justice cannot exist under war economies. So justice requires confronting these systems, not working around them. And last but not the least, it is to wrap up saying that youth and feminist movements as political actors, we have solutions in our hands, and these recommendations are a proof of it. So this is a call out to work with young people. This is a call out to work with women and girls. And here is just a QR code to scan, and you can get access to our full high-level priorities, youth and adolescents recommendations in English, French, and Spanish. I hope I could do some justice and share this abundance of knowledge that we have accumulated through this recommendation in such a short time. Thank you so much, and handing it over back to you, Rita.
Okay. Thank you so much, Aishka. All is not lost. We spoke about having a discussion board later on. So please do the QR coding there and start reading the recommendations so that you can be able to engage properly. So I think at the beginning, Deborah mentioned what does justice truly mean? Aishka went on to mention a couple of very, very important things. Reframing justice, transformative approach, justice that delivers on the rights and experiences of young people, no doubling down, but protection of justice issues, accountability, accountability, accountability. So just for us to bring this to life, we are going to go into a panel discussion where we will share concrete real-world experiences from the panelists' work across employment, education, entrepreneurship, and systems. So thank you, Aishka. Let me introduce my next panel, my next panelist. So we'll be sharing the full bios of the panelists in the chat. So please take time to read through those. If we go through all of them, we'll not be able to do justice to the panelist discussion itself. So I'd like to introduce and to bring on board Valeria Esquivel, who leads the Gender in Employment group in the EMPLA branch of LI Law. Our next panelist is Ruth Graham-Golder, who is the Senior Advisor, Gender Equality from UNICEF. We then have Dr. Josna Shah, Director of Skills from the Commonwealth of Learning. And last but not least, we have Zainab Ali, who is the Capacity Building Officer at UNDP Kenya. So please help me in welcoming this amazing panel here who are going to be sharing with us. So whilst they're also having this discussion, I would really love you to be engaging in the chat as well. What does justice mean to you? But what are some of those experiences? And you will hear the different experiences and how these panelists are actually trying to tackle the issue of access to justice. So please share in the chat as well. So just a quick note to my panelists, to ensure that we hear from everyone, I'll be keeping time. And so please don't get offended if I ask you to sort of wrap up a little bit, but thank you so much. So to start off with, I'm going to give you an overall question that you need to answer, all of you, and you've got 2 minutes to answer. So what would like to hear, and I'm sure the audience would love to hear, how many are we? We've got more than 100 people listening right now. And of course, they've got their own experiences, but I want to hear from your experiences. What are the most persistent barriers adolescent girls and young women face in accessing justice across learning, work, and economic participation? So I'll start with you, Valeria. You've got your 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you. I'm going to approach this question from the perspective of social justice. And social justice is not only the judiciary, it's more how just the distribution of time, incomes, opportunities take place in the economy and society. And to me, the barrier or the indicator is a synthesis of the barriers that young women and adolescents face in society is the need rate, the not in employment, education, and training that combines that lack of access to employment opportunities and lack of access to education and training. And unfortunately, currently, 1/5 of all young people between 15 and 29 years of age are in experiencing need. That is 257 million people in the world, but that means that is 170 million women and 86.5 million men. So the gap between the incidence of need between women and men, young women and young men, is very high. The other issue we have to let you know is that whilst there was a downward trend in the need incidence up to last year, unfortunately, things have stopped improving. The rate is projected to, the need rate is projected to go up, particularly in least developed countries. And there are reasons for this, but I will come back to them in my second intervention. Thank you. I hope I did well with time.
You did extremely well with time. Thank you, Valeria. I think some stark realities and important data that Valeria was showing us, and we had her talk about lack of opportunities, a big issue for young women and girls. So let me move on to Ruth. What are some of those barriers that you find in your work?
Thanks so much, Rita. I think there are many different things we can say here, but I'll choose to focus on the kind of social political roots, complementing what Valeria had shared. I think there's a fundamental problem that for adolescent girls and young women growing up today, you're still growing up in a world where a large segment of the population believes in discriminatory norms around girls and women's role in society. And just as one example, we know that even amongst adolescents, a third of boys and girls believe that intimate partner violence is acceptable. And those norms are pervasive. And yet we also have, and I think even more so today than we've ever had in the past, this narrative, this framing that because we've made some gains, that all of the problems are resolved. And that actually, boys and young men are the ones that have all of the challenges. And I think, we have to look with laser precision at the range of challenges that young people and children are facing and be very honest and very analytical about the gender gaps where they exist. And I just underline, I think, on the data, we know that globally, adolescent girls and young women are very disproportionately out of education, employment, and training. And that some stats are sometimes taken from one region or some countries to tell a story that isn't right. So I think that's really, really important that we're very specific. So just as one example, in South Asia, when you look at the NEET data, adolescent girls, young women, very disproportionately experiencing this NEET. And there are other regions or specific countries where there's a different pattern. So we have to be very specific about what the challenges are and where they are happening and what those patterns look like, particularly for marginalized adolescent girls and young women.
Thank you so much, Ruth, as well, for actually emphasizing gender gaps. And I'm looking forward to hearing more when we go into the second part of the discussion. Let me move on to Zainab. What are some of the challenges you are seeing? I understand you are based in Kenya, so please take us away.
Thank you very much. And I'm really honored to be part of this panel and to actually share our experiences with all of you. I think it is important that we actually acknowledge that one of the key challenge is that systems that sometimes are meant to support young people in terms of education, job, justice, and gender equality sometimes rarely work. I think another important point that we may need to highlight is that youth entrepreneurship programs often focus on skills, on finance, but overlook legal risks, leaving young entrepreneurs, for example, very vulnerable to disputes that erase economic gains. And if we look at it from the gender, for example, specific barriers that persist, patriarchal norms discourage women from pursuing formal justice, and we've seen this from the programs that we interventions with women in small who are small traders. Informal business arrangements that lack enforceable contracts. And of course, again, when you look at the marginalized in terms of the youth, women, and sometimes their social power, systems sometimes take advantage of their situations. The fear of courts, legal costs, and social stigma, disproportionately affect young women. They don't want to be stigmatized, so they'd rather just, stick around with their problems and see how best they can solve them out. And digital exclusion and low literacy further also limits, access for youth, women, and persons with disabilities, when it comes to these challenges that we have experienced in the communities that we work with. So I thought maybe I should just highlight that for now, and then once we get into the discussions, we can expound on that. Thank you very much, and over to you, Rita and comments.
Thank you, Zainab. I hear you emphasizing the failure of systems. Very, very critical. I think this morning I was speaking to someone, and she asked me to say, when you think about justice, what face do you see? So, and you spoke about patriarchy. So some of those things we need to be reflecting in terms of the failure of systems. Where is it starting from? You also alluded to norms, which Ruth alluded to as well. So I'm looking forward to the next part of the discussion. So yes, Josna, over to you.
Thanks, Rita. As everyone pointed out, that gender justice essentially refers to fairness and a redistribution of power. Ideally, it should get reflected in every opportunity that exists for young girls in learning and earning in any context. But unfortunately, that's not so. We work in different contexts. And in all of these, young women face a range of barriers, as others have pointed out. And it includes structural barriers that exist around race, caste, income groups, and that influence access. And not only it's unequal, but you also face discrimination, both in terms of education, training, or job market. But the real challenge comes when you even lack policy and institutional frameworks, because they define the entitlements and they provide a background for systemic interventions. So when they do not exist, you do not have a framework to go back to. And not only you lack these frameworks, and that is a challenge, but at times also you have frameworks that reinforce the barriers rather than breaking those. So while it plays out differently in different contexts, what emerges in all regions that there is a need to address systemic issues in a comprehensive manner when it comes to discrimination faced by young women in the area of both learning and earning, as we call it. But another important thing is this, that that we have learned historically, that there is no linear progress when it comes to gender justice. We make some progress, but then something else slips down. So I think one major barrier is this, that nothing is permanent, and there is a need for collectives, at all levels, civil society, youth groups, international organizations, grassroots organizations, that there is a need to continuously monitor so that we protect our gains that we have made, and and then make, further steps to move ahead. So, yeah, so I'll stop here and I'll talk of examples where we have tried to work with policy and institutional frameworks that have provided kind of frameworks for some changes. Thank you. And I hope I kept my time.
Oh, yes, you did. Thank you so much. I think all of you really went to school and you had very strict teachers because you're all keeping to time. So that's amazing. Thank you. Yes, so just now I hear you emphasizing the lack of policy and institutional frameworks. Very, very interesting because sometimes I think we forget about different frameworks that exist, whether they're being implemented, whether they work. So thank you for bringing that. And thank you all for grounding us in the realities adolescent girls and young women are facing. I'd like to go a little bit deeper now by asking each of you a targeted question on what has actually worked and what young people can push for next. So whilst we're having this discussion with the panelists, I would really love for the audience and, everyone who's participating in this call, for you to start thinking through what young people should push decision makers to do differently on, based on your experience, but also on what is being shared. We're seeing a whole range of discussions taking place here. So it would really be lovely for you to start engaging and also sharing your experiences. So I'll start with you, Valeria, once again. From a social justice and decent work perspective, how does advancing youth employment, especially for young women and adolescent girls, serve as a pathway to greater access to justice? And in your intervention, if possible, if youth had to prioritize one decent work reform to push for at national level, what would that be? Over to you.
Okay, that became complicated. But let me say first that one way of addressing these issues, these policy issues to respond to these challenges, is move away from the idea that it's the fault of young women and girls. It's not their fault. Something in the system, and as Jana said, is not working for them, and that is our responsibility. Those of us who are not young anymore. So the ILO approach is a transformative agenda for gender equality, and within that transformative agenda, which means changing the underlying causes for the social injustice we see, there are many policies that we could bring to the table, and I've asked colleagues to share a handbook of policies approaches, but I would highlight two. One is the lack of opportunities, of employment opportunities that young women face, particularly when they graduate. So the system has to produce those decent employment opportunities and has to have an eye on where these young women will find employment and help through that transition. But the other is most of needs or the reason to be need for young girls and women is their care responsibilities. In countries like India, 96% of all young women who are need because of family responsibilities. So we need to put in place transformative care policies, and we need investments in care, amongst many other policies that you can read in the handbook that it's in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valeria, for emphasizing a couple of things. I think one of the most important things that came out when you were speaking is the transformative agenda on so many layers. You spoke about care, you spoke about the burden that young women have. So I think it's extremely important for us when we look at some of these processes to look at it from a transformative point of view. You also emphasized how important it is to move away from the idea that the issue of being out of education or employment is the fault of girls and young women, but rather it is a lack of relevant policy as well as challenges that exist in the economy. So thank you for sharing that. Building on that, I'd like to turn to you, Ruth, to explore how these justice gaps are being addressed earlier during adolescence through programming and systems level action. So how is UNICEF addressing these justice-related barriers faced by adolescent girls through its programming, particularly in learning to earning pathways? And how does this align with your priorities? If you can also perhaps, just share how adolescent girls themselves sometimes are able to shape or co-design these justice-focused interventions.
Thanks so much, Rita. Absolutely. A few reflections. I mean, one to say, for those of you who don't know, UNICEF is the UN agency with the mandate to protect and promote child rights, so for every child. And so we have this real focus within our gender equality work, both on what we can do to support gender equality in general, if you like, through integration in all of our programming, from immunization to health to nutrition. And then we have very specific targets around adolescent girls. And I think really in recognition of the very persistent gaps and challenges that adolescent girls are seeing, and how gender inequality starts to really become exacerbated, to sharpen and deepen during adolescence. We have this laser sharp focus in our new strategic plan on adolescent girls. So that means a few things. Number one, that we have specific targets for adolescent girls across a whole range of areas. I thought the presentation, by the way, on the youth recommendations for CSW were incredible, so insightful. I was taking lots of notes and sharing with my team. But I think it really speaks to justice cuts across so many different dimensions of our work. Girls' lives cannot be divided up into different sectors and only talk about livelihoods and that transition to earning through the education and economic pathway. So for us, we have targets on everything from the persistent high prevalence of anemia for adolescent girls, through to child marriage, through to violence, through to, of course, the kind of what you'd expect around access to education, learning outcomes, transition to livelihoods, menstrual health and hygiene. I saw there was a comment in the chat about how important that is. So we have this range of specific targets. The second piece that we have committed to is really increasing our partnerships, building from momentum in the last few years with girls and women's rights organisations, and particularly with girl and youth-led networks, organisations and movements. And just as one example, last year we launched a new global initiative together with a feminist fund, We Are Purposeful, who are experts in delivering sort of direct grants to girls and their movements. And so that's part of the model now for our programming through, it's called Power for Girls. And so it's a combination of at-scale programming across these kind of multi-sectoral issues in girls' lives, but it's also funneling resources directly to girls, their movements and organisations. So just an example, Rita, to your point about how girls are involved, and they're involved at every level, including feedback on proposals, making decisions about funding allocations, et cetera, et cetera. The last thing I will just say is I think a big part of our strategy is scaling up these multi-sectoral approaches where we have evidence of impact at scale. I think the whole gender equality sector has been plagued by very limited resources, and a very small amount of that is targeted and going to adolescent girls and young women. And so part of what we are looking at is, okay, where are the big scale platforms or systems where there is financing already going, where adaptation or add-ons can really contribute to shifting some of these big gaps. So just as a practical example, we have a big global program called Skills for Girls, multi-partner with many national governments, private sector, etc. It's reached 17 million girls in the last 2 years, 47 million people with girl-centered approaches. But the whole point of the model is we're working across the different layers of the ecosystem. You know, we know one of the biggest barriers for girls and young women at scale is the financial barriers to education and learning opportunities. So things like cash transfers, removing school fees, subsidizing skills training packages, creating skills training where girls are, and particularly to Valeria's point about care, ensuring that there is childcare provision or there is a stipend that enables girls and young women to access whether it's formal or non-formal opportunities. That work with communities, men, boys, caregivers, parents, and referrals for essential protection and health services. So I think it's this package that targets a number of different issues simultaneously, and these interventions at scale that are essential, I think, for programming in this area.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ruth, for spotlighting adolescent girls and so squarely situating them within this discussion. Thank you for also highlighting how justice barriers often cut across sectors and all stages of life, actually, and how your work is trying to reduce justice gaps for adolescent girls. So thank you. Let me move on to Zainab. I want to focus on the role of access to justice in supporting youth entrepreneurship and economic agency, and you sort of spoke to it when you spoke about the barriers. So how can access to justice, especially through effective dispute resolution, serve as a key driver in supporting youth entrepreneurship and advancing gender equality?
Thank you very much, Rita. And I think from experience, it's important to take note that access to justice is a critical economic enabler for youth entrepreneurship, and particularly for young women, operating micro and small enterprises in informal markets where legal protection is weak and disputes are frequent. It's so important to appreciate that. Young women actually dominate small businesses such as market, food vending, retail, kiosks, yet they often operate without formal contracts, saving or legal safeguards. And I think another experience that we have encountered is that unresolved commercial disputes remain one of the leading causes of business failures among the youth-led enterprises, and especially, again, those run by women and first-time entrepreneurs. So, to address this gap, the Small Claims Court was established by the judiciary, and this is mainly people justice, centered justice mechanism, specifically designed to resolve everyday commercial disputes affecting the MSMEs and informal traders. So the Small Claims Court, provide the faster resolution of timelines compared to higher courts, jurisdiction of up to about 1 million Kenya shillings, which translates to about $7,700 claims, small claims, that can be settled quickly. And so through the support from the global program, the UNDP and the Justice Action Coalition program, we were able to support the judiciary in terms of centralizing and strengthening the Small Claims Court as an economic justice tool rather than just a legal institution. And most importantly, the integration of alternative dispute resolution through community justice systems that we were also supporting highlighted that many small claims were successfully resolved. Lower cost, quicker resolution, and preservation of business entrepreneurship was enhanced, and particularly effective in close-knit communities where youth entrepreneurs operate. So there was that opportunity for them. If you narrow it down in terms of gender perspective and access to justice, it affirmed that women have economic rights. That I think was very important. It built confidence among young women to engage in formal systems. And of course, also challenge the norm that positions women as passive economic actors, which is not the case. So basically, It emphasizes that justice therefore acts as the missing link that allows learning to translate into earning, and earning into dignity, and of course, dignity into long-term empowerment. So that was, came out very clearly because the women, the small traders were able to access that. And it also emphasized that...
Zaina, I will ask you to sort of round off a little bit. Thank you.
All right. But I think that gives you a gist of the intervention and the success in terms of ADR. Thank you very much, Rita, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Zainab. I was really enjoying the way you were explaining because it was like a step-by-step, which I had not heard before. So I'm really hoping that you are also going to be coming to the discussion board and actually inputting some of what you wanted to explain to us. You explained the importance of integrating alternative dispute resolutions into in legal aid and referrals, because you started talking about the digital solution as well as the importance of aligning courts to processes with community realities on the ground. So thank you very much for sharing that. Now that we've discussed employment, entrepreneurship, we want to look upstream at the education system. So I'd like to bring in Josna now to reflect on how gender and inclusion policies in tertiary and distance education can shift justice outcomes at scale. So when a gender equality and inclusion policy in tertiary and education is working well, can you briefly tell us what tangible changes do you see for girls and young women? Over to you, Josna.
Thanks, Rita, once again. And I will share a few examples of our policy work with tertiary education as well as ministry and as well as outside that. But before that, when Valeria talked about care and she referred to India, I come from India and I raised my daughter for, first 12 years while heading a public policy think tank. And I can tell you it was not easy. So people used to recognize me because wherever I went, a workshop or a conference, because I will have this baby with me of different age as time grew, who will be under the table initially with her colors, will be playing outside. So that's how I raised and also recognized how difficult it was. And therefore the younger colleagues, when they faced it, we realized that it takes every single day of intervention if you want to combine career and care. So that's deeply personal. Coming back to policy work, so I'll cite three examples and three different kinds of examples and how it helps. It's not a panacea, as we know, since these are such deep-rooted issues of injustice that anything alone is not a solution. But policy work does give a framework. So one example is our work in the Gambia in Africa, where we work with the Ministry of Higher Education, research, and something. So that's the ministry. And then another is the example of working with the university, the National University of Samoa in the Pacific. And I'm talking about those two together because I know one is the government level and one is the institutional level. But the process we followed was similar. We have a tool called Gender Scorecard, and we use that to have a process where we have a reflective exercise, both statistic, also we go into surveys and those kinds, but we also include a lot of reflective exercises. We take note of everything, we take account and we analyze. So the process itself actually allows a lot of self-introspection among those people. And those can be very different stakeholders within the institution you are working with, be it a university, be it a ministry. And that leads to a kind of then the next step of policy formulation, which again is through a process. And once the policy comes, like for instance, once Gambia, and so it's a long process, and accepted the policy, it also had a strategy. It was not only a framework, but also a list of interventions that government can take to facilitate young women's entry to training, entry to higher education, and entry to job market. And as a result, as a follow-up, for instance, the Gambian ministry is having a range of projects. One of them we are supporting, but they've also gone to other international agencies using that policy and the detailed strategy that they have. So we are working on gender and STEM. So we are having a pilot project where we are developing a mentorship model to retain girls who are in TVET because they have a very high dropout rate and enable their entry to STEM career. So we are doing that, and we could do that because we had a policy to support. And then they have plans to upscale it through money from bigger agencies. Similarly, National University of Samoa, it has now led to a strategy where they are talking of, since Samoa has this issue of also boys disengagement, so they are trying to address that, and gender violence. So the violence against women is very high, but when it comes to education, it's male who, they are not necessarily engaging with education. So they are trying to, address this riddle using this policy and locating it in an institutional framework. And and in that process, actually, again, in when it came to university, we had a large number of focus group discussions with faculties, with students group, with undergrad, postgrad, all kinds of students in different faculties, in different disciplines. So all that also leads to a kind of awareness and participation that you have otherwise not seen. But the third example is more interesting and perhaps of greater importance. That relates to Pakistan, where we have a major project of economic empowerment of girls and women. And there we are working through partners, local NGOs, and we have adopted an ecological approach. So where we do a lot of skills training, but we also work with all institutions like local bodies, schools, any other partner organizations, boys group, men's group, religious groups, and we do a lot of gender training around that, in addition to the skills work. So we there supported our partners relentlessly, actually. All these girls we were training, they took various kinds of campaigns against child marriage. And we feel that, we played a very important role, and all these campaigns played a very important role in getting this Age of Child Marriage Act that was passed in May 2025. And that has given the age of marriage is now 18. And as you know, that's a major justice issue. So policies, work with policies. As I said, it's not a panacea, but it does, provide an important recourse, an important step in the scheme of things that we are all talking about. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you so much, just now. I could hear you wanted to expand more on the examples, which were really, really interesting. And apologies just because we are behind time. And thank you, everyone, for indulging us as well. Just give us 5 minutes to round off. And just wanted to say also the insights shared today are not endpoints. They are inputs. They are meant to be challenged, to be refined, to be strengthened by you in the discussion forum that we're going to expect you to come into. So this is where ideas will turn into recommendations, and recommendations turn into accountability within the CSW process. So encouraging everyone to join us in the discussion board. And that said, I will hand over to Deborah. Over to you, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Rita, and wonderful session from the panelists. And thank you so much for such insightful conversation. And I'm sure that the participants on the call are learning so much. Okay, so now we'll move to the next. Because of time, we will not be able, we're supposed to go straight into the question and answers, but down. So the next thing that will be the closing remarks, which will be done. I'll introduce the speaker shortly. So if you have any questions, kindly drop them in the Q&A question chat box, and then the questions will be responded via text. Thank you so much. So moving on to the next part of the session, it's my pleasure to welcome Omila Sarka, Deputy Director Programs at Generation Unlimited, UNICEF. Oma joined the Generation Unlimited Global Team in 2019 and brings over 20 Chief of Education for South Asia, as well as Education Chief in India. She also served in ILO in space of youth skills and employment, as well as child labor. Over to you, Oma.
Thanks so much, Deborah and Rita and the whole panel. It's really, I think we've learned so much from all the speakers today. Great, thoughtful reflections, and I think that these are the kinds of gatherings that are so important for strengthening our community of practice in such a key area. So before we close, just conscious of the time, I just wanted to leave you all with a few thoughts. And one thought that has stayed with me, I was recently in Bangladesh earlier in the year, and I had the privilege of spending time with many adolescent girls and young women who are benefiting as part of an initiative called Girls Education Skills Partnership Program, which is, a lot of the kinds of different examples that you all raised in the panel and previously by other speakers, is looking at all the different ways we can empower adolescent girls and young women with skills and opportunities. And there's one woman in particular, Fatima, whose story I often think about. She was married very early and became a mother while still in her adolescent years. And at a moment when doors had already closed, she shared how access to skills and livelihood support through programs like many of the programs that you've described and such as GUEST have given her a second chance, not just to earn an income, but to rebuild her confidence, understand her rights, and begin navigating systems that she had really previously felt that were just out of reach. So many stories like that I was hearing when I was in Bangladesh. And for her, skills and livelihoods were not just abstract ideas. They became for her and many of these adolescent girls a pathway back to dignity, to voice, and to justice, the theme of our webinar. Stories like hers, to me, I think we'd all agree, are both humbling and inspiring. These young women are clear. They're very clear about the barriers they're facing, but they're also clear about what works and when systems respond to their realities. We really need to listen to them, not only for the problems, because they will experience them firsthand, but also the solutions. And they remind us that learning to earning pathways, when designed intentionally, we heard many examples of intentionally designed programs, can be powerful entry points to justice. And they help these young women reclaim agency, access protection, and make informed choices about their lives. So I think today's discussion echoed many of these realities. We heard it from the panelists, a wide range of amazing examples around barriers to justice that rarely exist in isolation. They sit at the intersection. We heard about education, skills, employment, entrepreneurship, social protection, and they require action at a community level, but also we heard at systems level, at policy level, in order to address gendered social norms and in order to break traditional norms. We also heard the progress happens when these pathways are built intentionally with inclusion, with protection and participation, and especially with young people at the front and center of everything we do. This is essential. So importantly, just to close, as today's discussion is really not an endpoint, I think it's a starting point, and we're inviting all of you to continue this discussion. That's the whole purpose and the reason why the Youth Foresight Community Forum has been set up. I know that you're posting online and in the chat where your insights and experience can contribute directly to the global youth and adolescent recommendations as we lead up to CSW. And as we move toward this, I hope we can carry forward not only the discussion we've had today, but also the voices of these adolescent girls and these young women who remind us why second chances matter and why learning to earning pathways must remain central to advancing justice and to advancing gender equality worldwide. Thanks so much again, and I really look forward to collaborating closely on this journey together with you all. Thank you so much.